guys, and welcome back. It's Ash, your truth-bombing fairy godmother for everything love, dating, and relationships. I definitely wish I had put out this video a little bit sooner because I think it was extremely relevant to what we witnessed both throughout and at the end of Peter Weber's season of The Bachelor, but I still think it's very applicable to everyday relationships and situations, which is the question, why do we as humans want what we can't have? Why do we chase people we can't have or who are unavailable to us in some way? Why do we romanticize rejection instead of running towards those who are readily available to us with open arms? I definitely think there's a lot to unpack there, and it's still worth talking about even if it's a little bit late. But first, before we get into the psychology behind all of that, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and of course subscribe to my channel for new love, dating, and relationship videos every single week. There are so many highly complex reasons for why people are motivated to pursue or chase others who are unavailable to them or are somehow out of reach to them. But for the sake of today's video, I want to stick to two of the most obvious or evident reasons that Peter was doing that, and also two of the most obvious reasons that I think the rest of us do that as well, which is one, Peter very clearly romanticizes rejection, difficulty, and chaos in his relationships. And two, he was just simply not ready or equipped for a real committed relationship, and he certainly was in no way ready for a marriage. But before delving into those two concepts more deeply, let's give a bit of a brief overview in relation to who I'm talking about exactly. So Peter Weber was the most recent Bachelor, for those of us who perhaps didn't watch, and he got down to his final two women, which were Hannah Ann and Madison. And to the audience, or at least to me, towards the end of the season, it was kind of obvious that he was more leaning towards Madison, despite them being on completely different pages in terms of their core values, their beliefs, their expectations in a relationship and in a marriage. But of course, that's the one that he was leaning more towards, where his relationship with Hannah Ann, despite not having any of those obvious red flags, was a little bit more, I guess, flat. I didn't really feel as much depth from them, but it was very consistent, and that's certainly more that can be said for literally every single other relationship he had throughout the season. Maddie ended up eliminating herself before Peter was actually even able to make a decision. So she left, and then he ended up getting engaged to the default option, if you will, which was Hannah Ann. But hang on, Peter decides that, oh, actually, he doesn't know if Hannah Ann was the right one for him after all. He doesn't really know if he can give her his full heart. So they ended up calling it quits, I think, a month or two after filming wrapped, and then production goes and gets Maddie and tries to kind of rekindle a relationship between them on After the Final Rose, in which they decide to take it day by day, but then ultimately announce their split, I think 2 or 3 days later. Oh, what a mess. What an absolute mess his season was. But within all of the mess, there's so much to be learned from, isn't there? Peter being so insistent on pursuing someone who was very clearly never going to be his wife is something that we can all learn from. We've all had someone in our lives that we were so hell-bent on making it work with, and that we've just latched onto and had all of these grand hopes and dreams and fantasies about, despite a much deeper, wiser part of ourselves knowing that it was never truly going to work. And the question is, why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we latch on to people who have one foot in and one foot out, or are just plain unavailable to us in some way? Why do we do this to ourselves? In Peter's case, and I think in a lot of our cases, one of the reasons is that movies, TV shows, books, the media, social media, of course, we can't forget about that one, has really caused us to romanticize rejection and difficulty in our pursuit of love. When of course the reality is that it shouldn't actually be that way at all. But thanks to rom-coms and just kind of Hollywood love stories, we are taught this concept that our pursuit of love should be like pushing shit uphill, and that if we just persevere and chase hard enough, we will prove how lovable and worthy we are to someone who is out of reach. That no matter how much it compromises our own self-worth and self-value, that we are willing to do whatever it takes to win them over and to make a difficult relationship work. And also, and this is a big one, so listen up, if we are able to win them over, we will not only prove to them that we are lovable and worthy, but we will prove to ourselves that we are special enough to change someone's mind or to change their behavior, that we are special enough to change the bad boy, or in Peter's case, that he is good and worthy enough to win over the pure, good, church-going girl next door. Different strokes for different folks, but it all comes down to the same principle. Think back on some of your favorite romantic movies or love stories. There is always some type of drama or battle in the pursuit of that happily ever after. First one that comes to mind for me is The Notebook. And don't get me wrong, I love that movie, but it really highlights how attached we are to love stories needing to be tumultuous or difficult in order to be truly worth it. They perpetuate a lie that love and affection that we have to work for and simultaneously hurt and erode ourselves over is more valuable than love that is readily available and accessible. And this pattern of viewing healthy, available love as somehow less valuable is a really hard one to break, because one, a lot of us simply find the challenge much more exciting. Therefore, we assign greater value to love or attention that was a challenge to receive. And the challenge of winning someone over or working for their love feeds a part of us that inherently believes or agrees that we do have something to prove. And then we become somewhat reliant on it to sustain our self-worth. It's how we get our fix. Winning over someone who is rejecting us becomes the only way that we kind of get that validation and that reassurance that we are in fact enough and worthy. So this is where really learning to rely on yourself and gaining that value and validation within and by yourself becomes really important. And secondly, this pattern is also hard to break or even impossible to break because we're just simply not aware of it. We cannot change what we don't acknowledge. The only way to change these patterns is to truly recognize them within yourself and then make a conscious decision to move in another direction. You must consciously choose to move towards partners that actually show up for you instead of viewing them as less than simply because they're not withholding love and affection from you. So in Peter's case, I think it's abundantly clear that he is failing to acknowledge this pattern within himself. I truly believe that Madison, although she is a lovely girl, a big part of the allure for Peter was the fact that she was always that little bit out of reach. She didn't tell him she was in love with him when so many of the other women did. She expressed serious concerns about their lack of aligned core values and beliefs, and how her religious beliefs that he didn't necessarily share affected her decision to save sex until marriage. And of course, she ultimately rejected him and broke things off and left before giving him a chance to make any kind of real decision. So the ball was very much in her court the entire time. Had the tables been turned and Hannah Ann been the one that was that little bit out of reach, had she been expressing more serious concerns about their lack of compatibility and that she, wasn't actually sure if she could see a future with them together, had she always kind of had that one foot out the door approach like Madison did, mark my words, he would have been hung up on Hannah Ann. That would have been the girl that he would have been chasing and that would have ended up capturing his heart. Peter very clearly eroticizes and romanticizes rejection. He very clearly has a false belief deep in there somewhere that love should be a battlefield, that it should be difficult and painful in order to be truly valuable, and that if it's too easy, it's somehow worth less. The second part of this that I mentioned and why I think Peter was sort of hell-bent on chasing someone that he couldn't have was because, quite simply, he was just not ready for a real serious commitment, and he was in no way ready for a marriage. Peter is a very, very young 28. In terms of emotional maturity, I would probably put him more at 21, 22 years old at most. And the reasons for this became abundantly clear by the end of the season, didn't they? One word: Barb. Of course, I'm in no way a psychological professional here, but I think it was very obvious, even to the most average Joe on the planet, that Peter has been very emotionally stunted and held back by a very, very overbearing and over-involved mother. Peter has no idea what real connectedness and togetherness and commitment with anyone else other than his mother really looks like and what that really entails. Like I said earlier in this video, within all of us is a much deeper, wiser, loving adult energy that knows best. And within Peter, without a doubt, there was a much deeper, wiser part of himself that knew better and knew that he was in no way ready for a real commitment and marriage. And how do I know this? Because his actions proved it. Over and over and over again, his actions shown that he was not ready and that he knew he was not ready. He wanted a dramatic, chaotic, tumultuous storybook romance or love story, whatever. He didn't want an actual commitment from someone. He didn't want a wife. He didn't want someone he was truly compatible with and that he could build an actual life with. Therefore, he became most attached to the women who were least likely to result in that, who were least likely to result in an actual lifelong commitment. I can think of very few genuinely meaningful conversations he had throughout his entire season. He had a couple with Kelsey, and I did speak about that a bit previously in one of my other videos that compared and contrasted his interactions with Kelsey to someone like Victoria F, where with Kelsey he did have some actual meaningful conversations about their childhood traumas, and Kelsey expressed her views of what she wanted out of a marriage and how she envisioned things and how she envisioned her career being balanced with taking care of children. Those are real conversations that two people who are actually interested in marriage talk about. Peter barely scratched the surface in any of his other relationships. He spent an obnoxious amount of time chasing after chaotic relationships and feeding emotional volatility and immaturity, convincing women why they should stay, talking about how he would rather have a crazy relationship instead of an easy one. Someone who is actually genuinely interested in finding a wife doesn't waste that amount of time on that type of nonsense. Plain and simple. And you know what? If Peter had at least recognized that and just had the self-awareness to say, you know what, hey, in hindsight, I was and am not nowhere near ready for a real commitment or a marriage with someone, then I would respect him a lot more. But he hasn't even had the insight or the ability to admit that to himself, further proving how not ready for marriage, he is. I hope he is able to recognize that real commitment is not chasing after emotionally unavailable women or pursuing women that he's truly incompatible with at a core level. All chases must come to an end, Peter. And you know what? I really do feel like he was just a dog chasing cars. What would he actually do if he caught one? Had Madison come to him and said, you know what, Peter? Let's do this. I'm 100%, I'm all in. He would not have even been remotely prepared for what that would have entailed, for really rolling up his sleeves and doing the type of premarital work with someone to work through such vastly different beliefs, expectations, ideologies, values. He would not have been prepared to come to the table and truly do that work with her. They would have had some really heavy obstacles in their way. And the reality of it is, Peter just wants to have fun. He just wants to line dance and do his thing, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But admit that to yourself, acknowledge that, recognize that that's simply where you're at in your life right now, and that's fine. But he just needs to get it. He just needs to get that and admit that to himself, because I think that is the first step in really moving through this in a productive way and getting some type of success out of this epic failure of a season. And the same can be said for us. If we notice ourselves associating drama and difficulty with love, or consistently latching on to people who are unavailable or out of reach to us in some way, we need to really recognize and identify this, because there's likely something much deeper going on. It's so important that we recognize the difference between chasing after someone who isn't fully sold on us versus the type of real work and challenge that is associated within a real equal partnership where there isn't a push-pull dynamic at play. And the only way to grow out of this and move towards something more mature, or something that is more likely to lead to a meaningful commitment, is to consciously practice moving towards love that is readily available. To actively move towards people who see us for how worthy we truly are without needing to prove that to them in any way. The chase is not the same thing as love. Love is what happens when two people truly show up for one another. It doesn't happen within a push-pull dynamic. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, whether or not your interpretations of this season and Peter were the same as mine, or perhaps you noticed things that I didn't. I'm sure we can all agree that it was just a mess, and I'm very much looking forward to an older crowd. So bring on Claire's season! Until next week, see you next time.